14, which is on page 1063 in Church Bibles. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. This is the word of the Lord.
There are some things we can't see. Now, could you just talk to the person next to you for a moment and see if you can think of something that you can't see, and agree together something that, because I'll ask you to call it out in a minute, something that you'll call out that you can't see. Okay, I expect you've thought of something by now. What can't we see? You can't see the dirt in the air, little particles. And dust, right. Yeah, yeah? The wind. No, we can see the effects of the wind, but we can't see the wind. Has anyone else thought of anything else you can't see? You can't see the yolk in an egg until you crack the egg open. That's very profound, Sylvia. Thank you. And yeah, can't see love. No, sometimes we can see signs of love, but can't see love itself. And James? Is it William? Sorry. Your heart. Okay. Yeah. Prayer. Can't see God. And is there anything else we can't see? Well, that's a good one to move on, actually, thinking you can't see God. It's very true. You can't see God. If you have a Bible open on page 1063, just after the bit that Barnaby read, it carries on for a few verses, and in verse 18 it says, "No one has ever seen God." And also, you mustn't look at God. In the Bible, people always realize that if you get the chance to see God, it's a very dangerous thing, because God is so pure and holy and like a burning fire, that for sinful people with wrong in our hearts and dirt in our hearts, if we saw God, we would die. So there was a man a long time ago called Moses, who God was going to give him the opportunity to meet very closely with God. But he still couldn't look at God's face. Moses had to hide in a rock, and the glory of God passed by, and he could just see his back, and somehow didn't die. And then there was a man called Isaiah who had a vision of God in the temple, the Lord high and lifted up. It was just the hem of God's robe that filled the temple. And even just seeing that, Isaiah said, "Woe is me, I'm going to die because I'm a sinful man and I've seen the Lord." And it was only because God provided a special way of forgiving him that he was able to survive seeing God. So we can't see God. Even if we could see God, we mustn't see God. And even if we could see God, if we're honest, I wonder if you would agree, perhaps we don't want to see God. Many people don't want to see God, or sometimes don't want to see God, and him to see us, if we want to live our life our own way and not his way. And so we'd never be able to know God that we can't see, except the good news of Christmas. God became human. Verse 14 said this, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us." The Word, which was that word for Jesus. The power by which God had created the world by speaking. The Word of God became flesh, had skin on, was a human being, and lived among us. And John, who wrote this, was very close to Jesus. He saw Jesus. And so I would like 2 volunteers now who are close friends with each other to demonstrate how close John was to Jesus. You could be 2 people from the same family, could be a married couple or a parent and child or a brother and sister. Do we have 2 volunteers who could come out and help demonstrate this? Some people thinking about it. Oh, great. Robin, and we've got 3 of you. Great. So we've got William and James, isn't it? Right. So I'm going to tell you about a time when Jesus was having a meal with his friends. And if you can find a Bible in front of you, turn on to John chapter 13, page 1081, page 1081. John 13, verse 21. And this is a time when Jesus and his disciples have had a meal together, and they didn't sit at chairs around a table. They had a very low table down on the floor. So how do you think they got their food from the table? Don't know. Well, they weren't sitting. Come on the floor down here, you 2. They weren't sitting up like this. They were reclining, which means they were lying down and propped up on one elbow. So can you lie like this? But the food's here, so you want to have your head this way and your feet pointing back that way. Come over, put your elbow over here. That's right. There, you're reclining there. And can you recline here as well? Lie down here with your elbow here. This elbow down here. And your feet over there next to your brothers. That's right. On one side like this. Okay? And then can you move forward a bit, William, towards me? Right. Now I'm going to read to you what happened. Jesus, in verse 21, said, "Truly I tell you, one of you is going to betray me," because he had 12 friends with him there. And his friends, his disciples, stared at one another at a loss to know which of them he meant. One of them, the disciple whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. Now imagine, this is Jesus. It's brilliant. You can see it on the screen. Here's Jesus, and here's the disciple Jesus loved reclining next to him. Simon Peter motioned to this disciple and said, "Ask him which one he means." So leaning back against Jesus, he asked him, "Lord, who is it?" So can you lean back against James? That's right, to ask him the question. So that is how close John was to Jesus. The Word became flesh. God that we can't see or know. John was right there next to him, leaning back against him to ask a question. Now, we might not have thought very much of that, but John remembered that moment because a few chapters later, he said, in the very end of his gospel, John chapter 21, pages are stuck together in my Bible. There we are. So page 1090, verse 20. This is after Jesus had risen from the dead, and he's talking to some of his disciples. He's talking to Peter. Peter turned and saw that the disciple whom Jesus loved was following them. This was the one who had leaned back against Jesus at the supper and had said, "Lord, who is going to betray you?" So, writing about this, John remembers and makes that connection. He was the one that had leant back against Jesus. And then he says, in verse 24, "This is the disciple who testifies to these things and who wrote them down. We know that his testimony is true." Okay, thank you, boys. You can go back to your mum. And the thing to remember from that is that John is calling himself the disciple Jesus loved. He doesn't use his own name when he writes about himself, but he's saying, this is the one who wrote this book. And so you can know that it's true. He's the one Jesus loved. He was that close to Jesus that he touched and he leant back against. God become human, the Word made flesh, Jesus. He's saying, I saw Jesus, I touched Jesus, I saw the Word made flesh. I'm fascinated by chickens. Does anyone else keep chickens? So we have a few chickens in a run next to our drive, and when I'm walking past, sometimes I stop and look at them, scratching around in their run, and they stop and look at me, and I wonder what they're thinking. And it's probably not very much, because I don't think chickens have much of a brain. So they're probably not wondering what I'm thinking, but they do look at me. And I don't think they think about me. I don't think they think very much about Barnaby, who gives them their food, except that when they see him coming, they expect food. But I wonder what's going on in the chicken's mind and what it's like to be a chicken. Every night they all go up the ladder into their house and roost, except one who always refuses to go in the house and sleeps outside, even when it's -8 degrees. And I wonder why. I don't understand the chickens. I wonder what it's like to be a chicken. I suppose I could really know what it's like to be a chicken if I could become a chicken, which I can't. But actually, even if I could, I don't think I would want to. It's a fairly disgusting life, pecking around for their food on a dirty floor and always threatening to peck each other and have a photo that they represent themselves with. Most people have a photo of their own face on that, don't they? But some people have other things like a dog. Or does anyone have a picture of a child on your profile on Facebook or any other social media? So just hands up if you have a child on your picture. Maybe you're worried that I'll draw attention to you. I think quite a lot of people do. And God shows us himself through his Son. It's the picture of God's Son who shows us what God is like. Because God became human, Jesus shows us what God is like, and Jesus brings us to know God. We have seen his glory, verse 14 tells us. And this is what the next slide should show us. Jesus brings us to know God. When we see Jesus, we see God. And Jesus can bring us safely to that dangerous place of blazing purity with God. If we want to know God, we need to go through Jesus. He's the only way we can know God. And that's good news because Jesus is knowable. John's book introduces us to Jesus. Why not read it in the Bible? Or if you'd like to take one of the magazine, Ian, could you just wave one of those magazine copies called Hope there? That's got all of John's book, John's Gospel, in there. So do take one of those home to read this Christmas. There's also other accounts in the Bible of Jesus' life, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And our little course called Hope Explored of 3 evenings in January is looking at some bits of Luke's gospel to get to know Jesus. And people might not be convinced about him, but might have questions and come along and talk. So do ask me later if you're interested in coming to that. Jesus brings us to know God, which is the great news of Christmas, that we are loved by God, that he cares about you and me. He knows you, he understands, and he wants to be with us. So Merry Christmas, and God rest you merry. God keep you merry this Christmas time in the knowledge that his great love is shown to us in Jesus. That's what we're going to sing about now. Let's stand.